The sky above the United World Council building was clear that morning. Birds flew between towers and the sun warmed the glass walls. But inside the main hall, the air felt cold. The large screen in the center showed the Threxan dominions. Official message. The alien emperor's voice was deep and filled with pride. "Humans, Neil," the voice said. "Your place in this galaxy is below us. Surrender your weapons, your data, and your future. Become servants of the Threxan Dominion, or be removed." The room was silent. Leaders from every human colony, from Earth to the moons of Jupiter, sat with hard faces. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, an old man with gray hair stood up. His name was General Larson. He had seen the Threxans before. He had lost friends in the border wars. His hands were calm, but his eyes burned. "They think we are weak," he said. "They think fear will make us fall." A woman named Dr. Alina. Voss tapped her fingers on the table. She was one of Earth's top scientists, known for building strange, powerful machines in secret labs. "We can't fight them directly. Not yet," she said. "But maybe we don't have to." The president of Earth leaned forward. "You're thinking about Project Ashes?" Lena nodded. "It was built for defense. But if we change the approach, it could do more than defend. It could erase." Most in the room didn't understand at first. "Erase what?" Young leader asked. "Not their ships," Elena said. "Their legacy, their name, their place in history." No one laughed. They all knew how dangerous the Threxans were. But the idea was different. It wasn't about winning a war. It was about ending their story. General Larson turned to the screen. "If we do this, there's no turning back." "We were never going to kneel," the president said softly, and so it began. Over the next few weeks, Earth sent a reply. They accepted the terms. They sent gifts, old Earth art and rare materials. The Threxan Dominion smiled. The Emperor himself announced that humanity had submitted. He wore a golden robe, and his long claws tapped on the armrest of his throne as he spoke to the galaxy. "See how even the newest species understands its place?" he said proudly. At the same time, a human diplomat named Nolan traveled to the Threxan capital. He arrived on a simple ship, dressed in soft fabric with no signs of rank. In front of thousands, he bowed and handed over a scroll with humanity's seal, but it was all a mask. Deep in the asteroid belt, a secret fleet was being built. It was called the Silent Wind. Ships were shaped like sharp needles, painted black, and had no names. They made no sound. They left no signal. Inside them, human engineers had placed weapons the galaxy had never seen: digital storms, memory scramblers, and invisible projectors. The lead ship was commanded by Captain Morgan Hale. His face had a long scar from an old Threxan raid. Never smiled. He never gave long speeches. But his crew followed him without question. He had once lost his home to the Threxans. Now he had a mission. Not revenge, but silence. Across the galaxy, other alien species noticed the humans had gone quiet. Some thought they had given up. Others didn't care. Only a few guessed something was coming. One of them, a small alien trader named Vex, whispered in a smoky bar, "Humans don't forget. They don't forgive. They wait." On the 30th day, after the false surrender, the human fleet left the shadows. They didn't head for the throne. They didn't aim for weapons. Instead, they went to the Threxans' heart, their story. The first strike was not seen. Single beam cut through the great memory tower on Vorthox Prime. Within seconds, every Threxan history file, every art piece, every anthem gone. No noise, no alarm. Just silence. Captain Hale gave only one order: proceed. One by one, the ships moved. They didn't destroy cities. They erased symbols. They turned statues into dust. They scrambled faces on paintings. They changed street names in seconds. And in some places, they made people forget why they even bowed to the Emperor. On Earth, people returned to their work like nothing had happened. News feeds spoke of peace. Schools taught children to question stories, to seek truth. But somewhere in the dark, A whisper moved. "They told us to kneel," the whisper said. "We chose something else." The Threxan Emperor stood in his grand hall watching the stars from a tall window. Below him, banners of conquest hung beside trophies from fallen worlds. He smiled as he looked at the human gift, the old Earth scroll sealed in gold. "Kneel," he said proudly, as all must. His advisors nodded. But one, a tall creature with thin arms and tired eyes, seemed uneasy. His name was Krell, and he had studied human behavior for years. Emperor Krell said carefully, "I believe we should be cautious. Humans are unpredictable." "They submitted," the Emperor replied, waving his claw. "We have their bow, their signature, and their tribute." Krell bowed his head but did not speak again. Deep inside, he felt something wasn't right. Far from the Threxan homeworld, the human fleet moved like shadows. Their ships had no names, no colors, and no signals. They floated in the silence between stars, guided by old maps and secret codes. Their targets were not military but cultural. Their mission was not to fight. It was to erase Captain Morgan. Hale stood on the bridge of his ship, watching a small blue world on the screen. "Is this one confirmed?" he asked as second officer Lena nodded. "Yes, sir. Central Threxan, Library Center. Holds their entire colonial history for 4 planets." Hale didn't blink. "Erase it." The ship released a silent pulse. In seconds, every file, every image, every story stored in that place vanished. It didn't explode, no fire, no smoke. Just silence. The people on the planet didn't even notice until they tried to access their history, and when they did, all they found were empty screens and blank tablets. In another part of the galaxy, Threxan students opened their lessons. One by one, their lessons failed to load. Music archives went quiet. Statues lost their shapes. Books turned to empty pages. Confusion spread, then fear. On one world, a Threxan elder cried out, "I don't remember our song." A child asked, "What song?" There was no answer. Back at the galactic hub, other species started noticing the changes. A news anchor from the Volari system looked into the camera and said, "Many Threxan worlds are reporting memory loss. Cultural data seems to be missing." Some thought it was a virus. Others blamed a power failure. But one group, the Zenari Council, met in secret. Their leader, a short being with dark red eyes, spoke quietly. "This is not a glitch," he said. "This is human work." But humans gave in. One member said, "Did they?" The leader asked. On the Threxan capital world, panic grew. Temples faded, statues crumbled without reason, entire buildings were left with no meaning. Priests forgot the names of their gods. Teachers forgot their lessons. The emperor shouted orders. "Find the cause. Find the ones doing this." Ships were launched. Investigators searched, but they found no traces. Nothing to fight, nothing to catch. The enemy was not attacking, they were deleting. And then, human diplomat returned. Ambassador Nolan walked into the Great Hall, his hands folded calmly. The Emperor stared at him with burning eyes. "What is this?" the Emperor demanded. "Why are our records fading?" Nolan didn't answer. Instead, he handed over a small device. "This," Nolan said, "is a gift." The Emperor crushed it with his claw. Nolan smiled. "And just like that, your name is gone from 5 systems." The Emperor stood in silence. His guards aimed there. Weapons. Nolan didn't flinch. "We were told to kneel," Nolan said. "But we chose memory. We chose silence. We chose to erase. You will regret this," the Emperor growled. Nolan turned and walked away. "I already did. When you erased my brother's village, across the galaxy, stories changed. Space maps updated, removing Threxan symbols. Monuments faded. Digital news feeds stopped showing Threxan faces. Even the Galactic Council began using the term former Dominion instead of Threxan Empire. The change wasn't just in data, it was in thought. Even allies of the Empire stopped speaking their name. Some young aliens asked, "What is Threxan?" And their parents only looked at them, confused. On a small moon far from any empire, Captain Hale stood under a dark sky. He looked up, holding a tiny chip between his fingers. This was their anthem, he said softly. Now, it's just silence. Lena stood beside him. Do you think they'll learn from this? They won't remember enough to learn, Hallie said. But the others will. He crushed the chip. No sparks, no light. Only the sound of wind. The stars kept turning. The galaxy kept spinning. And somewhere in the dark, a message passed between ships, spoken in low voices. Never tell a human to kneel. The Threxan Dominion was known for its pride. For centuries, their empire had ruled with fear, demanding respect through fire and strength. They believed records could not be destroyed and that their legacy would live forever. But now, even their oldest leaders were beginning to forget. In one of their core planets, a high scholar stood in front of his students. He opened a book, once full of Threxan history, only to find blank pages. He blinked, unsure what to say. There used to be words here, he muttered. A student raised a hand. What were they about, master? The scholar tried to answer, but nothing came. His mouth opened, but no sound followed. His eyes filled with fear. Across the empire, the same thing happened. Schools, temples, and records, empty. People forgot names, dates, and stories. Cities still stood, but their meaning faded. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its quiet mission. Captain Hale sat in his command chair aboard the lead ship. Crew operated in silence. They didn't cheer or celebrate. They only focused on the next target. Next archive is located on planet Relau 7, Lena said. It's a central hub for Threxan war records. Hale nodded. Erase it. The ship launched a stealth beam. Invisible to the eye, it touched the archive, and in seconds the entire building went dark. The war records were gone, not destroyed, but deleted every image, every voice file, every detail of every battle. And now, even Threxan veterans began to forget how they won. In a secret meeting on a neutral space station, alien leaders gathered. They came from many species, once afraid of the Threxans. They sat around a quiet table speaking in soft voices. I checked our old trade records, one said. The Threxans aren't even listed anymore. Same here, another added. It's like they never existed. A third leaned forward. This is human work, and it's terrifying. They all nodded. The humans had not fired on cities. They hadn't planted flags. They didn't demand tribute. Instead, they made the Threxans vanish from memory. Maybe it's justice, one leader said. For all the pain the Dominion caused, another answered, maybe. If we ever cross the humans, no one replied. Back on the Threxan capital world, Emperor Torval was losing control. He shouted in meetings. He broke furniture. He blamed everyone. How can this happen? He yelled. We are the Dominion. But, even as he spoke, his name was removed from the Central Galactic Registry. Ambassadors returned home. Threxan flags were taken down on allied worlds. In a last attempt to regain respect, the Emperor called for a grand ceremony, invited remaining leaders, and demanded the event be broadcast across the stars. When the day came, he wore golden armor and stood tall on the stage. We are still strong, he shouted. Our name will never fade. But the screens went black. Not a single world received the message, not even his own people. Worse, many of the guards standing nearby didn't recognize the man speaking. They looked at each other in confusion, wondering who the angry figure was. His own name erased from their minds. Ambassador. Nolan returned to Earth and stood before the World Council. The room was quiet, full of leaders who had watched the galaxy. Change. It's done, Nolan said. Their story is no longer written. General Larson nodded. How long will it last? Forever if we choose, Elena Voss answered. We didn't destroy them. We simply removed them from history. Some in the room looked troubled. Others seemed satisfied, but all agreed on one thing. This new kind of war had changed everything. Did they suffer? someone asked. Nolan looked up. They simply faded. In space bars and hidden corners of the galaxy, travelers told strange tales. There used to be an empire. One would say, "What was it called?" Another asked. The traveler paused. "I can't remember." Others nodded. No one remembered the face. It was gone. On human ships, quiet music played. No victory songs, no loud cheers, just silence. "We didn't erase them out of hate," Captain Hale once said. "We erased them so the galaxy could heal." And as the stars turned above him, the mission moved on. There was still more to forget. The Emperor sat alone in the grand hall. The once bright banners were dull. The golden walls felt cold and empty. Statues of former rulers stood nearby, but even their names were fading. He stared at one of the tall stone faces and whispered, "Who were you again?" His voice echoed in the silence. No one came to visit him anymore. Most of his guards had left. His own people avoided his presence. He had power, but no purpose. He had titles, but no memory of what they meant. His empire still had ships and soldiers, but no one knew why they were fighting or for whom. Outside the palace, the streets of the capital were changing. Signs once marked with imperial symbols were now blank. Official buildings became quiet. Shells. Some citizens began calling the city by a new name, forgetting the old one entirely. In one corner of the city, a group of students sat around a teacher. "What does the word Dominion mean?" one child asked. The teacher paused, unsure. "I don't remember. I think it was a name, maybe of a group or place, like a story," another child guessed. "Yes," the teacher said slowly, "like an old story no one tells anymore." Across the stars, human ships continued moving in silence. They entered systems with no announcement and left without a trace. They did not attack people. They only removed memories, old war logs, recordings, names, faces, songs, and flags. They erased everything that could be used to tell the Threxan story. Captain Hale stood in the command room of the lead ship. A large screen showed the next target, a space museum floating above a forgotten moon. "This one?" Lena asked. "Yes," Hale replied. "End it." The ship's special beam reached out once more. A bright flash filled the sky for only a moment, and then the museum went dark. Inside, datapads turned blank. Statues cracked. Exhibits vanished. Even the stars seemed to grow quieter. On neutral planets, aliens watched and whispered. "They didn't burn cities," one said. "They burned meaning." "They didn't conquer," said another. "They made them disappear." And still others whispered a warning, pass from one traitor to another. Never tell humans to kneel. The Galactic Council, empty seats, were left where Threxan delegates once sat. Motion was passed to remove all records of the Dominion. No debate, no protest, not even a memory strong enough to resist. When a young alien asked why the seats were empty, a council elder looked confused. I think those seats were always empty." Just like that, the Empire had never existed. General Larson watched the stars from a quiet base on Mars. He listened to a message from one of the outer colonies. "The people no longer remember the Threxans," the report said. "Children call them shadows. Adults say it was all just fear and myth." He looked at Dr. Elena Voss, who stood beside him. "Is this right?" he asked. "Did we go too far?" Lena didn't answer. At first, she stared at the stars too. "We didn't kill them," she said softly. "We just made sure they couldn't hurt anyone again. But they're still alive. They just don't know who they are." "Maybe that's punishment enough," she said. On a quiet world once ruled by the Threxans, the old man walked through a garden. He looked up at a broken statue. Something inside him said it was once important. He touched the stone and whispered, "Who did you used to be?" A child tugged his sleeve. "Come on, Grandpa. We're going to be late for the music show." Old man smiled. "Music. Yes, that sounds better than statues." And he followed the child toward the light in deep space. Captain Hale recorded one last message before shutting down the mission. "To anyone who finds this," he said, "we didn't do this for power. We did it because no one else could. They wanted us to kneel. They wanted us silent. Instead, We erase the sound of their rule. He paused and looked at the stars beyond the glass. We didn't win a war. We ended a memory. The screen blinked. Off. His ship turned slowly and vanished into the dark, leaving behind no signal, no name, no trace, just silence. The stars above the galaxy shined as they always had, but something had changed. A name once feared, once known by all, had vanished. The Threxan dominion was gone, not by war, not by fire, but by silence. Their statues, flags, songs, and history were erased like dust blown by the wind. In the outer rim, traders moved between stations. One of them, a tall alien with scales, sat at a bar and told a strange story. My grandfather used to warn me about some empire, he said. But I don't remember its name. Just that they were cruel, younger trader asked. If you don't know the name, how do you know they were real? The older one paused. Maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just a dream. He took a slow drink and said, no more. On Earth, the United World Council gathered for the first time since the mission ended. The room was quiet, not tense, but thoughtful. Leaders sat in a circle, sharing updates from across the colonies. The last human fleet returned. General Larson reported, their job is done. No more traces left. Alina Voss added, our systems show Threxan identity markers are now less than 1% across the galaxy. Even language patterns have shifted. Soon no one will remember their name at all. The president of Earth looked at the council members. And how are our people responding? Not calm, Nolan answered. They were never told what we did. Only that peace was achieved, and most prefer not to ask how. The council nodded. It had been a quiet victory one without parades or medals. We didn't do it to be remembered, Larson said. We did it so others could forget. On a small green planet once ruled by the Dominion, life bloomed again. Flowers filled the fields, music echoed from villages, schools taught new songs, and families laughed under the sky. A young girl sat under a tree with her grandmother. Was there ever a war here? The girl asked. The old woman looked out at the hills. Maybe long ago, but we don't talk about it now. Why? The old woman smiled gently. Because some stories are better left in the dark, and some names are better left unsaid. Child nodded and began to hum a soft tune, one passed from human colonies to peaceful worlds, a song of freedom, deep in a cold part of space. The last Threxan leader sat inside a quiet building. No soldiers stood guard, no servants walked the halls. The rooms were dusty and silent. He looked at the walls where great banners once hung. They were blank. In front of him sat an old data slate. He tapped it. Nothing showed. He tapped it again. Still blank. His name, whatever it had been, was gone. And he no longer remembered why he was angry or what he was supposed to rule. He simply sat, staring, waiting for something to return, but nothing ever did. The galaxy, free from the shadow of fear, began to change. Species that had once been quiet started to speak. Small planets that lived under Threxan taxes became places of trade and friendship. For the first time in centuries, peace felt real. And though humans were respected, they did not brag or boast. They returned to their work. They helped rebuild. They taught others the one lesson they had learned well. Power doesn't come from ships or fire. It comes from what people remember. In a museum on Earth, there was one room with no signs, no lights, just a quiet wall with a small plaque that read, "To the Forgotten." Students would visit and ask their teachers who, "Is this for?" And their teachers would answer, "No one." Students would blink. "Then why is it here?" And the teachers would smile, "So we'd never become them." On his last day as commander, Captain Hale stood outside his ship, watching the stars. With Lena beside him, "Do you think anyone will ever know what we did?" she asked. "Maybe," Hale said, "but not the full story. Only that we were told to kneel, and we stood." They stood in silence for a while. Then he said, "Our mission wasn't about destroying an empire. It was about giving the galaxy a chance to forget pain, And they have, Lena said softly. Good, Helly replied. That's enough. He turned, walked into the ship, and closed the hatch. The engines hummed once, then fell silent. The ship disappeared into the stars, and the galaxy turned peacefully on.